Hey, this is Jay.
And this is Chelsea.
Welcome to the Shifting Perceptions podcast.
We are bringing you inspiration to live a more creative lifestyle because our favorite people are the ones that choose the path less traveled. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 8th episode. This week's interview is with Dan Blank, owner of WeGrowMedia. It is inspiring and motivating, especially for those of us stuck or looking for the best way to find out what's next in our creative endeavors. This week, we discuss healthy and calculated ways to try on entrepreneurship for size, what your daily schedule can look like with a bit of planning, and we get some teasers from some of his mastermind groups. Dan is a published author, coach, and motivator for aspiring authors and creatives. His daily routines, processes, and experience will leave you with the structure and first steps towards your goals that you've been looking for. Let's jump in.
Well, hey, Dan. We are stoked to be with you. Thank you for making time to talk to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So is it weird being on the other side of the mic right now, Dan?
A little bit, because I'm not sure what to expect. So that makes it fun and exciting.
Well, I guess we have to start this off in the same way that we did last time. And I should say that last time we had such an extended talk was on your podcast, Doers and Dabblers, which was a really fun talk. And we started that off in the same way by saying how we met, which is kind of cool. You and I first met in high school, which is, a pretty nice little trivia fact for people. And we lost touch for a little bit afterwards and then reconnected about 10 years ago. We just reviewed, and we've gone a lot of different directions in those years, haven't we?
Yeah, when I hear you talk, I literally just imagine a 16-year-old Jay talking.
It is weird how, obviously we've changed a lot and we've gone in so many different directions, but it is interesting being a parent, knowing that, knowing each other in our teenage years, which your one son is only 5 years away before he hits his teenage years.
Gosh.
It's weird thinking you can have enough character traits and personality to kind of maintain a friendship and a bond after this many years.
That's what makes it interesting, I think, is certainly as you get older, is realizing things you can experience that you can only experience over the course of time.
Yeah. And it's like, as much as we have changed, I'm still like the weird art guy, and you're still like the intellectual writer, creative guy. So it's like some things have changed so drastically, and other things are like, yep, we're kind of still the same sort of people, which is refreshing in a way.
Yeah, and it's funny because when we first reconnected, it was not just before, but not long before the both of you had kids and had your family, and that was whirlwind, I would imagine. So it was neat to touch base with you then, and then get to know you after that.
Yeah, a whirlwind is a great way to describe that, Dan. So to get our audience acquainted with you, so I'm not sure where to begin, because you are multi-talented, multifaceted. You have a lot of different things you're dabbling in, and let's talk about all of them. But in no specific order, you're a podcaster, you're a published author, a coach. You run these amazing mastermind groups. You're a hobbyist guitarist that I see, which is really cool, like myself. What other titles might I be forgetting?
Beyond that, it's, husband, father, and that might cover much of it.
Okay, that covers most of the pillars. So you're an author of a book called Be the Gateway, a practical guide to sharing your creative work and engaging your audience, which I would love for you to talk about a little bit, because those sorts of topics are ones that not only do you and I deal with on a personal level as creative people, but then we also both do creative coaching, and we also have a lot of friends and acquaintances in the creative world, whether it's writing or music or art, which are all so similar. What have been some of the epiphanies that you had during the writing of that, and then following up after the book was out? How has that book changed you, and what have you learned from it?
It's a great question. So all I do is really work with writers and artists, and it's been my full-time job for 8 years. So the book, it's sort of the culmination of the philosophy that I've really developed in terms of, if you're someone who's creating something, how do you develop a platform and connect with people, but in the process, have it not be perceived as branding and marketing, but as creating meaningful experiences that emanate from the book or from the art. So the idea, I was writing a totally different book, and I'd written like 85,000 words of it, and I sort of got crushed under the weight of it, just editing it. And in the Mastermind group that I run, I do a daily video. And one of those daily videos, off the cuff, I did a 10-minute video and made up this concept of be the gateway. So I actually have the moment of ideation like on video. And the group really loved it. So there's, writers and artists in the group, and they loved it. And they kept referring to the concept of being a gateway. And it's this idea that you are identifying what it is you create and why you create it. And that's the other side of the gateway. And then you've got to kind of walk through it and go out in the world to learn about other people and learn what they love and why they engage and where they are. And then one by one, you sort of walk them through. It's this idea of creating meaning around sharing what you do. But once I had such good feedback in the group, I did a blog post, and that did really well. And then I have got a really good friend who's also a book coach. Her name is Jenny Nash. And I asked permission. I said, look, instead of doing this big book I want to get an agent for, can I just write this little book on the side, a 20,000 word book, just expand this concept, self-publish it, no big deal. And she said, yeah, you're allowed to do that because we've got a good creative collaboration. And what happened from that was wonderful because it gave me permission to just dig in. It ended up being much longer than 20,000 words. And because I didn't have a big expectation, I just had fun with it. I sort of did it in a very small way, a way that felt authentic, but it's really become a foundation for how people know me and for how I can introduce people this idea of, yes, you can share your work, but you don't have to follow marketing trends. In fact, there's a big chapter in there of like, ignore best practices. So it's this idea of how can you do this in a way that feels meaningful to you. And the rewarding part is really just having those experiences with writers where you're able to take them through that. And it's like their experience of realizing like, oh, I don't have to become this other thing to share my work.
That's awesome. So prior to that, had you published it? This was the first published work you'd had?
The first book, I've published a newsletter and a blog for probably 13 or 14 years. I've had podcasts before that. I've been on social media forever. So it's a weird thing where, in a way, I've been clicking that publish button for so long, and I've been very public about it, but there is something very special about the package of a book.
There is. It's like such a permanent record. I noticed from following your newsletter, which is awesome, by the way. I only subscribe to maybe, 8 or 10 newsletters, yours being one of them. I always look forward to on Friday. And I noticed a couple of yours recently talking about a couple of antique typewriters you collected, which I found interesting, not only for the reasons that you mentioned, but I find it so cool that you have a fondness for nostalgia and legacy. And I feel like having a book sort of creates and adds to our legacy. Have you found that as well? Is that one of the reasons that you got into publishing?
It's a good question. I think with a lot of what I do, what I try to realize is that the things that motivated human beings in the 1920s, the 1820s, the 1970s, those things haven't changed. We look for inspiration, the way that we engage with other people, those things are kind of timeless. And I think that when I'm doing the work of marketing or thinking about how do you spread your message or how do you share your work, I'm thinking about those eras. I'm thinking about what would someone do in 1926 or 1967. So the idea of the typewriters is partially because I like old things. It's just fun to buy stuff that has gears. I bought 3 in the first batch, and one of them I brought home of an 8-year-old. And it was great watching him just be totally fascinated with this, trying to figure out how it works. He's asking, this is over the summer, and he's like, oh, can I do homework on this? And I'm like, you can try. I don't know what your teacher's going to think. And you sort of see that basic human curiosity and fascination where he didn't really get that this was 1910 technology, actually probably earlier. That one thing that's great about looking at them is the technology lasted for 50 years unchanged. And he was equally as fascinated as a kid in 1910 would have been.
Right.
And that's something I like to keep in mind when I think about what is it to create, what is it to share, and what is it to not feel overwhelmed in a world with 24-hour news cycles and social media and all the stuff that people feel overwhelmed with.
No, I think that's awesome. I also just love how the way that this bigger book came about for you was so organic in the sense that sometimes creatives, I feel, are trying to sort of force something just because they need that finished process or, product. And for you to have just started doing, like you were just doing and doing and doing, and then you just sort of fell into something that clicked. It's kind of that backwards way of looking at a process that actually works better in the long run.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's what I try to look at with things is if you're talking to people, like no matter what kind of art you create or whatever you do, if you're always talking to people who are enthusiasts for that, you will learn things, you will find opportunities, you will have insights. And I think a lot of people isolate themselves. They write a book or they write an album in total isolation. And we all do that sometimes. And we have that dream of once people find out about this, it's going to blow their mind. And then you realize you were mistaken. It's what you created was good, but it just didn't blow their mind. And you're not sure why. And one thing that I think I want people to avoid is that idea of feeling bitter, of never having connected, so they don't understand, they never learn how their craft can connect with people, and they end up feeling isolated. They feel shy, or they just feel bitter about the process. They say, oh yeah, I published a book and nothing happened, and let me tell you all the reasons why, and why nowadays you can't do that, and what's wrong with publishing. And it's like, that's not a very fun way to experience your craft.
So many creatives like put those types of self-imposed metrics on their work. Like, I'll talk to artists that I might be working with, and they will have so much pressure, like, well, how am I going to make money from this? Or how should I market this? And I'm like, especially at the beginning, like, do it because you love it. If you don't really love it, like if you wouldn't be doing it for free, don't do it anyway. And I compare that to like our mutual love of noodling on the guitar. Like I totally wish I could be a rock star, but I know that's not a reality, but I play it because I love it. I'm not going to sit there and say, well, how am I going to get my first album deal from learning this song?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what blows me away about, like, I'm kind of properly learning guitar now. And when I tried and failed to learn for decades, it feels like it's neat seeing what YouTube adds to that, because there are so many people I follow on YouTube who are teachers overtly, or they're just enthusiasts who teach. And what you get from them is a real reality of what does it mean to be a master of your craft, and what does it mean to be a working musician. And I think that's what social media in general can give that is very positive, when you can follow a mid-level in terms of success band on tour, and you realize like, oh, this is a lot of like sleeping in the back of a bus and, a lot of just traveling, not a lot of money. And you get to experience that for better or for worse. And I think it's very educational. It removes that divide between will I make it or not? And you realize between this idea of making it and not making it is all of life.
That's powerful. Like, it's so related to something that you talk about a lot. And I think whatever terms we use to describe it, it's something we all have passion for. And that is, you're always talking about finding clarity, finding radical clarity is how you refer to it quite a bit. And I think it's so important for people to have that sort of clarity of purpose and vision of why you are doing things with intention. And it seems like that is lost upon a lot of people, and people get stuck in that realm of like, why am I really doing this after all? What have been some, epiphanies that you've had with yourself or with your clients on that topic?
Yeah, there's a phrase I use in the Mastermind. I'm actually curious to see your take on it.
Okay.
Where I say, I don't believe in balance, I believe in obsession. And some people prefer the word passion than obsession, and I understand that. But I think that we're able to see so much now because of the internet, essentially. So it's easy to feel like you should be doing this, should be doing that, could be doing this. And I think when I speak to anyone who's doing something they feel fulfilled about, they have a very narrow focus. They really care about a few things. And therefore, they put all of their energy, way more energy than anyone else, into it. And a byproduct is that they put less energy into other things. And sometimes that's a very flippant, silly thing. Like the typewriter thing for me was me saying, I don't know why, I'm so curious about it. This is a waste of my time, I know, but I'm just going to allow myself because I feel obsessed about it. Let me do the research. Let me go on eBay. Let me get some. Let me find room. Let me play with them. Let me learn how to clean them because I'll bet I'll learn something about the creative process in there. Let me just trust that. But other times it's the really deep stuff, which is, and this is what I tend to dig into in my podcast, is that whenever I talk to someone who is successful, so recently I've talked to a couple of women who are full-time artists. And when you talk to them about their journey, what you find is that they have put in more effort than most other people. A lot of people put in a lot of effort. But to really succeed, it means you've got to go so much past your limits than you would like to think. I wrote a blog post about this once about this author who had become a bestseller and won this really prestigious award. And he had said he had submitted his book to be published 76 before he got an agent. And I was really thinking about that. So I wrote it out in the blog post, 1, 2, 3, all the way through, just trying to think that if he had stopped at number 35 or so, he would have felt justified to stop submitting it to say, you know what, I gave it a good shot. 35 people rejected me. And he was only halfway to where he needed to get an agent. And I think to get a publisher was a whole other submission process. And that's something I think about a lot with clarity is when you're radically clear about what you want in your life, it means you can double down on that. And it means that you can feel okay about doing that. You feel I'm going to double down on family, or I'm going to double down on this cause or on this kind of art. And you're going to feel okay about it. You're not going to feel guilt. And then it allows you to make very proactive decisions about where you're not spending your time. We were joking in the Mastermind the other day that I spend a lot of time with my family, and I'm an early bird, so I wake up really early, and I don't really like going out at night. I don't like big mixed social things. So whenever anyone's like, oh, there's this thing coming up, are you around the evening of whatever? And I'm like, well, if it's after 7 o'clock, the answer is no.
Yeah,
like, I don't go out at night. I'm home with my wife and my kids, and that's just where I'm comfortable. It might not be the healthiest rule, but it's also like I know that's where I want to put my focus.
Right. Yeah, well, it always comes back to that. You can only be really good at like three things at once. I find it, you have to choose them. And each day I feel like that can come down to that. It doesn't have to be your big life thing, but if today you're focusing on work and family, then tomorrow it might be in health and fitness. And, it's like sometimes you have to cycle through these hyper-focused processes.
I love that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so since you do get to sort of be in the trenches with a lot of these writers and artists that are hitting these walls of, I don't know where to go next, what are some of the similar things, like things that would relate to our audience in the sense of, oh my gosh, yes, I'm going through that, or I'm hitting that exact roadblock? Like, what are these things that everyone hits that you have to push through, that you have to get past?
So usually it's the idea of all these different ideas. Yeah, I don't know which one to pick. And they sort of want either easy validation or they want proof of which one will work best. And one thing I see is like, just pick something. I don't care what it is. Pick something and maybe put a boundary on it. You're going to do it for 60 days or for a year, but pick something and really go for it. Put the other things to the side, because in that process, even if you picked the worst idea and you fumbled it the whole time, you will learn something about yourself, about the creative process, about whether you liked it or not.
But at least you're not just spinning your wheels, right? Like at least you're focusing on something.
Totally. Another big one is I wish that people would reach out to other human beings more often. Something I talk about a lot, but if you're not sure about things, reach out to 5 authors who you admire or to other people and just ask their advice.
Yeah.
Just reach out to another human being in a very simple way, and make that connection. I have authors do that all the time, and they'll reach out to an author that they really admire, and they have all the common objections. Oh, that author is too busy for this. They're never going to write back. In fact, I'm bugging them. And what I say is like, what is that author doing at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on a Tuesday where they don't want to get an email that says, your work changed my life. I just want to let you know that I'm a struggling author, blah, blah, blah. I just want to say thank you. And way more times than not, they get an email back within a day where that author is like, you made my day. Thank you so much. And I think that your podcast and mine too are also emblematic of that, where you get to have a long, deep conversation with someone. And that is something that a lot of people don't do when they go to the same job every day. They're so stressed out with just living life to have a 30 or 60 or 90-minute conversation with one person or 2 people and just really go to those deep places. So I find even a podcast is a wonderful like hack into that idea of how do you learn about a trade or how do you find out what is it really like? There's only so many blog posts you can read before your head starts spinning.
And that's like so easy nowadays. You know, like what you're talking about, I've been practicing for as long as I can remember. When I was a freshman in college, I remember going to the library and getting trade journals and art books and looking up artists. And in my spare time between eating lunch and going to my next class, I would pull up these trade journals and call illustrators or painters or people that I admired and just ask them questions. It didn't even occur to me why on earth would they field a phone call from an 18-year-old pimply kid in a dorm room. I just did it. And nowadays there's zero excuse because everyone is like a click away. Everyone's overly accessible to talk to and find. And you know, what you're talking about just comes down to being willing to ask and put yourself out there.
I'm nodding up and down feverishly.
Yes. It's just shocking that people are not willing to put themselves on the line and do that. Like people like us, creative people, like in quotes, we thrive off of that connection. And so many people think that we are in like another realm, like we're too busy, when in actuality, like you said, we'd rather be either with our kids or talking about nerdy art stuff.
Or helping others.
Or
find
helping
the same
other
path.
people, yeah.
Totally. I also think this is a big part of like what creates a creative community. I was interviewing illustrator and writer Miralee Patel, and she had worked alone for like 6 or 7 years, working a full-time job, creating at night. And now she is part of a co-working space, and she really has a very tight-knit creative community. And she described it as like, they keep me sane because you know, all this stuff goes on. You're not sure what to think. You're not sure if you're doing the right thing. And when you have colleagues that you can ask about, they can give you advice. It goes from this place of total anxiety, total uncertainty, total fear to realizing, oh, everyone has these challenges. And together, even if they don't give me answers, I at least feel like I'm not out here on a limb by myself and we can work through it together. And I think too many people work isolated, or when they reach out in a way that's very transactional. They want to reach, I'm going to reach out to so-and-so because then if they can give me a guest blog and then I can do this, like
right.
They think it's being authentic, but there's a transaction involved.
I hate that.
It really can't be authentic at that point.
Yeah.
So much of what we're talking about now comes back to your point on obsession. Like, I know for me, I still, even at this point in my career, experience tons of anxiety and stress and insecurities, like with every painting, with the book that I've been writing for a few years, even with the podcast, I get stressed, I get nervous, the same sort of feelings that anyone would have on any level. But our collective obsessive nature forces you to get to the other side of that. And that's where obsession really comes into play for me. And it's something that as a child, I didn't know how to deal with. Even in high school, when we first met, I had very obsessive tendencies and anxiety, and I would have been diagnosed with any number of disorders that were 3 or 4 letters because I didn't know what to do with that. And when you can sort of redirect that energy in a good way, it really can be powerful, can't it?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because you realize it's not a bug. It's actually what makes you special. And the anxiety, I think, is actually the norm for a lot of people. I think the process by which you manage it is what's interesting. And this is something I deal with a lot with writers and people in the mastermind. But even the people that I talk to, I interview, one of my favorite quotes ever about this is from when I interviewed Dani Shapiro, who's just a successful writer. And she talked about on the flip side of success. And what she said was, a lot of people think that once you succeed, things will get easier. And she said, not only doesn't it get easier, it actually gets harder. And she talked about imposter syndrome and all of this stuff where the moment you gain something, you fear losing it and you question motivations, you question your own ability. All this stuff happens. And a lot of people who hear that, who have not felt they have quote unquote made it, however they define that, they'll say, oh, I'd love to have that problem. But when you talk to enough people who do what they do full-time professionally, you realize that it is equal in anxiety to someone who feels lost in the middle of a state where they don't feel understood and they don't have an audience and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like we always talk about creatives here, creativity can run deep, but in my career as a birth doula, I feel like just to have other doulas or other people that work in the birth space that I can actually speak to and discuss all of those anxieties with, it's a game changer. And any profession can be isolating. Like you can hide away and do what you do, no matter who you are. But I mean, Jay and I will see each other spiraling when it comes to creativity or my work or whatever we're doing. And that is the cure, is you need to talk to other people going through this, because I can't speak that language with you right now. Like you need it. It's like a human connection to actually cure those anxieties together. I
love that. Yeah. And I can't even imagine how you must experience that as a doula, which is just such an incredible thing to do. So that's amazing to me.
Yeah. Which is also, it's funny because I keep thinking about my partner who, she is, she's like 20 years my senior, and she's seen a lot more in the world than I have. But she always says the thing that's changed in the last 10 years of talking to pregnant women is the first thing out of every single person's mouth that hires us is, I suffer from a tremendous amount of anxiety. That's why I'm hiring you. And it's so crazy. I'm like, have we just changed the definition of anxiety? Like just every person that exists now just believes we're diagnosable like with this. It's such a fascinating thing.
What's funny is I wonder if part of what that might be is that we're allowed to talk about it now.
That is
true. Whereas in previous generations we weren't, but now we have Brene Brown, we have social media, we have this ability to not feel as much shame in saying I have anxiety.
Yeah, that's true.
So much of anxiety, staying on that topic for a second, is so based around worrying about the future. And I think that is a lot of what prevents people from taking the necessary risks to get what you want. People always want this seemingly intangible thing, like you said, success, whatever that means for them. And let's say people like you or I or Chelsea who have accomplished some cool things in our careers that maybe are worth mentioning or bragging about or being proud of. These things are not as easy as they look, and they took a lot of risks to get there. I was looking in one of your, I want to say it was maybe an Instagram post you put up, which stuck with me. It was something along the lines of being creative equals risk, which really makes me want to ask you, what sort of risks have you taken that maybe are the most profound, whether it means they were the biggest risks or ones that really made you flop, and which ones have you learned from the most, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two, but one is a really big one, which is when I worked, in a normal, corporate company for a while. And then when I was around 37 or so.
What were you doing? Because I really don't know that part of your life very much. For everyone, what were you doing?
No, I worked within a big publisher. They were more of a magazine publisher, but at that company is where I really got into blogging and newsletters and social media. So for literally hundreds and hundreds of editors across like 40 or 50 brands, I became like the digital guy in the early 2000s. And we published Library Journal and Publishers Weekly. And I've always, as you know, been really into writing and the arts. So that's how I spent a decade from around 2000 to 2010 with all those writers and in kind of spearheading some of this move to digital. And it's after that that I went out on my own. And there were two risks that really precipitated that. One was within the company, I decided to start my own newsletter. I asked permission. They said, okay. I emailed it to 9 people who I knew. And one of them sort of said, well, you have to forward this to the CEO. And I said, no, like there's no way I'm sending this to the CEO. This is like a little thing. And he's like, well, if you don't, I will. So it was sort of like a threat from a friend who had really good meetings, but it was a newsletter where I talked about my thoughts about where digital was going. And back in 2005, that was almost a fireable offense because people were really trying to hold on to print and old school stuff. And I remember I clicked send to the CEO. I got permission from my boss. And I sat near where the executives were, and I saw him walk out of his office into my boss's office and close the door. And I literally at that point just said, I'm fired. That's it. I've stepped outside of line. I've said something too forward thinking. I don't know what. And then he leaves. My phone rings. She calls me in her office, asks me to close the door. And it's like, that's it at this point. My whole career's over. And what she said was he loved it and he wants to forward it to the whole company and encourage them to sign up for it. And in a big company, that was weird because a lot of individual voices are not often shared. There's a company line. They're balancing a lot of different narratives at once. And that was a huge moment for my career. And that started my newsletter, which I still send every Friday. But the bigger risk was when I went out on my own when I was 37. We decided we were having our first kid. And I wanted to go out on my own. My wife was very supportive. She was an art teacher at the time. We said, okay, here's, the company was actually closing down. So I knew I was getting laid off. We said, let me try my own thing. And I'll be like, I'll be the primary parent at home while on the side, I developed this business. And I wrote about that on my blog, what we were doing. And I got a comment on the blog and it said, think about your family, you dolt. And it just...
You dolt.
And it was basically telling me how I was totally screwing over my family, our financial future, that this is a time when you don't take a creative risk. You don't take a risk. This is a time when you buckle down with the safest bet, and the safest bet is clearly always a full-time job. That's where that person was coming from. And that was a huge risk because I was, the last day of the job was like July 3rd or 4th, 2010. Our first son was born that August. And it was a huge risk. And it was great coming out of that too, because what we learned really quickly was my business started doing okay pretty quick. And we kind of flipped it really quickly where my wife in the bottom of the recession, she gave notice. She gave up a tenured art teacher job, which she was wonderful at and she was great at. She just quit in the bottom of the recession to be home with our son and so that I can focus on building this company full time. And I will say it's a roller coaster sometimes of anxieties, as you said, but I think I was more anxious when I worked at a full-time job because I was always worried about layoffs because there's always rumors about layoffs. And even though I never know what's going to happen in the future or almost month to month, you at least feel like you're sort of able to really connect with people. There's a bit more control than just if you're on the wrong list at any given layoff in the company.
So I love that big shift at that point. I feel like I want to know more about how, what business was that? What was the platform when you first, you had this amazing newsletter. What was your platform to make money at that point?
The newsletter was the platform. So what happened was first it was internal. Then I started, after about 2 years, I made some of it public in a blog. So I danblank.com. I think a year later I did that. That felt terrifying again. I don't know if I'm allowed to be public about my thoughts. I have a job. And then when I knew the company was going to essentially break itself apart, I made a transition with the newsletter to make it a public newsletter. And that felt terrifying and risky as well. So when I first went out on my own, I honestly didn't know. And my wife reminded me not long ago of like, remember when you want to go out on your own, but you had no idea what it was going to be? And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And at first I just hung out my shingle. I said, hey, I'm out on my own. All you folks know what I do. Let me know if I can help. And people started hiring me for like website stuff and social media stuff and blog help and media stuff. And it kind of evolved. And I didn't know at first. And it was interesting to see. And I can go back and look at the very first clients I had. Some of them are very basic, very web focused, very, can you help me build this? Can you do that? And then there was one client that they followed my newsletter. They were a privately owned, I think, Dutch publisher. They liked my newsletter and they wanted to do an offsite retreat with their senior staff and have me take them through digital strategy for publishers and writers. And at the time, because we had a young son, I said, well, I'd love to, but I don't travel. Can you come to Madison, New Jersey? And they got back to me and said, sure. So the top 5 executives came to my hometown. I rented a hotel, conference room, and I ran a 2-day workshop. And I mean, beyond after the birth of my children, of just all of that, whatever, like it was the third biggest sigh of my life after that was done, because to lead these 5 people through a workshop, a 2-day workshop, they flew halfway around the world to do it. And it was early on, it was a really big moment for me. And a lot of those early moments too were putting out proposals with numbers attached to them and feeling terrified that you're asking for money and you're asking for that much money. And that was an early thing too, is just trying to get anyone to tell me what I should charge was so difficult in the early days.
So I find the mastermind part of all of this whole platform just amazing. And I think it takes a really special person not only to organize that, but to sort of put together content for people that are in that vulnerable spot. Is that the primary now? Like, is that the thing that you're loving right now? Or which part? I know you're always doing the newsletter, but which part of this is the thing that you're like, this is what I love?
Yeah, I mean, that's my main thing. So it's actually called the Creative Shift Mastermind because it's about making that shift. So it's this idea that every single day I'm engaging with writers and artists who are going through a lot of the topics we're talking about in this podcast. And to have that kind of a resource. So part of what it is I'm there and I do a video every day and I give this whole curriculum, but they meet other people who are going through it. And what's amazing to me is the stuff I couldn't possibly create on my own, where I will watch friendships form and colleagues form. I've had people travel to meet each other and people get best friends out of it. And you're like, that wasn't me. That was just, I created this container, but look at what can happen if you create the right scenario where not only do they move past a boundary, not only do I help them, but they can connect with other people. They can learn how to connect with them and give back in a way. So that's been truly magical to watch. And that's why, I do it quarterly. I've done like 14 or 15 of them. So it's been a few years of it. And it just blows me away how every quarter this magic happens.
That's fascinating. What I'm really interested in hearing your answer to is, you said you were in corporate America for 10 years, and then you were describing how you felt more anxiety during those years than being on your own, despite the risks and the cyclical nature of working for yourself, which I understand all too well. Can you talk to me about how necessary those 10 years were? Like, was that the foundation of what you are doing? Could you have worked there for maybe a year or two and still done what you're doing now? If someone is at a job and they're thinking, well, I want to do what Dan did, is it beneficial for people to stay in a job like that just for the experience and just for the comfort level? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely believe in having a financial runway for whatever you want to do. I would not recommend someone just jump out and take a financial risk for themselves or their family. When I did it, what's nice about having been in a job for 10 years is I had like 6 months of severance or something like that. And I also knew the company was folding, so I was able to prepare for this ahead of time. What's nice about that is that you get to do something on the side. So for years before that, I had the public newsletter, the public blog, and that gave me a platform outside the company. I think that that's the thing most people don't have. A lot of people spend most of their time with the same 5 people in their profession. It's people in their department, the one person in Denver that they've got to call for IT. They've got this very limited network, and they don't expand that network. So what happens is they define themselves very narrowly, and the only people that know them as that one thing. I certainly learned a lot in those 10 years. If it was 7 years, was 2 years, it's very hard for me to say. I will say that I did really enjoy that job. I really loved the people I worked with. And I was really fortunate. My dad had pointed this out to me right in the middle of it when I was doing really well there. And he said, one thing you should be aware of is you're in a good spot. You're at a company that is rewarding you for thinking differently. They're rewarding you for your writing your own newsletter. That's something you want to be aware of, because there are a lot of companies who would not want that, where you would not, he didn't say be punished for that, but where it would be frowned upon. So I was in a very fortunate situation. And with some of it is I pushed boundaries in the safest way I could. So some of it is the newsletter, but some of it was I pushed really, really hard to work from home. And at first it was to work from home even once in a year, and then it was 1 day a week. Then it was working full time from home, and that caused a lot of uncomfortable situations at work where you had to really push for that. And thank goodness I did, because it allowed me to think, can I work on my own? So I got to test drive that while I still was fully employed. So I think if you're in that situation, you want to really start testing the boundaries to see, well, what would the next step be? Is it full-time on my own, or is it part-time on your own? I don't think you have to go all in if that doesn't work for your life.
Yeah, I love that. I think Jay and I actually have a funny parallel with and this isn't working for a corporation by any means. Jay had started that entertainment agency many, many moons ago. And one day he didn't so much test drive. He just sort of launched
the eject button.
Yeah, he just launched his body out of that business. But for me, that business has been a gift to us, and I got to test drive something that everyone said you couldn't make a living off of, is being a doula, and I'm making it happen. It's pretty cool. And so we slowly got to sort of ease our way out of it. And I think when people talk to us and they say, well, how do you just become an artist and become a doula? They both seem like really high risk things. We did the same thing. We test drove a lot. Like, we had this opportunity to say, we have this business that has 25 years in the making that's still helping us along, to like help us make these new jumps and leaps and shifting forward.
I think an interesting point to the whole testing things out, it can go the opposite way too. So in my career, as you know, I kind of just jumped and made it work, which kind of forced me to knit a parachute on the way down. But what I did was I also was test driving a job that I didn't want. And I feel like that is an equally motivating force. So I obviously have been doing art my whole life, but I also was testing out the waters of doing something that I hated. And I feel like that testing, dipping your toes in the water thing can work both ways, like the carrot and the stick, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the 2 years before I started my company, I talked to a lot of people who had their own companies. And I remember one of them telling me about it. He made the roller coaster motion with his hands. And he said, be wary. There's going to be an emotional roller coaster where one day you're going to feel like you're on top of the world. You've created this thing. The next day you're going to feel like you've totally messed up your entire finances and your family, and you've ruined everything.
Oh my God,
and there's no rhyme
hour.
or reason for that. Yeah. It's just going to come and go, and that's the reality of it.
Yeah. It's so cyclical. I mean, we all experience that. I'm not sure to what level you still experience that, but it's like 1 month I feel like, oh, I'm crushing it, and the next month I'm like, I'm being crushed. Yeah. It's like, it's almost comical, but after you do it for enough years, you just realize, okay, this is just the part of the roller coaster I'm on now.
I think that's the trick. So I go through that. Everyone I know goes through it. I think the key between someone who's doing it professionally and someone who's still dabbling with it is that when it happens, you're aware that even though you're feeling that, you're aware of what's happening. So you're kind of stepping outside saying, oh, I'm heading into one of these moments. And then what I have is I have actions I can take. So sometimes that's text Jay. Sometimes that I have weekly calls with 2 friends and colleagues, and we just talk about professional. We have like one-on-one mastermind. So one is my friend Jenny Nash, who's a book coach. We have a call every week, and we each come with like one topic. And there's not 10 minutes of like, oh, how's it going? How are the kids? It is like, are you starting? Am I starting? And we're right into it. Like, this is what I'm worried about this week. This is what I'm trying to brainstorm. This is what I'm trying to hack through. This is a problem. And we do it every week. It's 50-50. We go, her side and my side. And I have the same thing with another friend, Lori Richmond, who's an author illustrator. And it's every week we have that. And what's nice about that is that when other things come up, I have either them I can reach out to or someone like Jay, where I can be like, Jay, can you talk? And without question, I'd be like, yep, tell me a time. Having that is life-changing.
Yeah. So much of that parallels the creative process for me, and I'm sure for you as well. It's like Chelsea and I always talk about, I have all these different phases of painting, and it's very up and down, roller coaster-ish, where, I'll come upstairs from painting and I'm like, I am doing so awesome. This is the best painting in the planet Earth. And then the next day I'm like, I suck. Maybe I should look for a job. And it's like so up and down. There's so many different phases of it. And after a while, between Chelsea and I talking about it, we've come to just realize like, oh, this is the phase of painting where you hate life and you want to stop painting. Oh, this is the phase where it's the greatest painting. And then I'll say, oh, it'll probably be done in about a week. And she's like, okay, this is the part where the painting is actually 3 months away.
Or the opposite, where it's actually done. That's usually what it is he has a habit of extending on past where it's usually
Well, it's hard to
finished.
know when you're done, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of those topics, can you talk about your creative process when you're not wearing the coaching hat, when you're not wearing business Dan Blank hat, when you're just sitting down to write? Because I know you have a daily writing practice. Talk about your creative process.
So for me, it's very structured, where what I try to work through is just having a routine and essentially living by my calendar. So it's this idea that for any of the daily practices I have, it's that it has to be either at a set time during the day. So with writing, it's usually the first thing before anything else takes me off track. And then I time block. So I time block my day really seriously, meaning I go to my calendar and there are blocks of time. If I have a task to do, I don't have a list. It is assigned a block of time. So for anything that's recurring every day, like I've been practicing guitar every single day since December 18th of last year. And that's a half-hour block that I move from day to day. When I practice, I then move it to the next day. And that forces me to get it done. It's not negotiable. And sometimes what I do is I set a minimum. What's the minimum I need to do? So with guitar, I set the half hour, but the rule I have is I have to pick it up. So if I pick it up and play a G chord and put it down, I get a star for that day. So there's no judgment about quality of the work.
You could tell you're a dad when you're using like gold star references.
Yeah, we have similar structure for our pee in the potty situation happening here. So
for our kids, not me. We should specify.
I love it. But that's how basic it has to get. It's almost about that basic level, because what I'm really optimizing for is guilt. I don't want to feel guilty that I haven't picked up the guitar in 3 days, or that I'm not progressing, or that I'm not writing enough, or the words aren't good enough, the book's not coming together. What I know is that if I keep working on this, something will come of it. And I might feel bad about it on some days, I might not. But if I just have that on the calendar and look at what's the next thing on my calendar, and I either move it like a half hour later or I do it, it's like I just know I'm using all the ingredients, and I don't know if the cake will come out good, but I know that if I keep baking this cake again and again, I'll kind of figure it out. So that's part of how I do it. And the other part is kind of what I alluded to before, is I'm always testing out ideas. So if I write a newsletter every Friday, I've got to click publish on. If I record a video on my mastermind 5 days a week, every single week of the year, if I have a conversation with Lori and Jenny once a week, no matter what, I have someone who works on my team, so we're always chatting about different ideas. even if it was just that, that is so much for me to work through ideas and to test ideas that I get to do that. And in addition to that, there's so much else that I do because that is not the full time.
I have like a similar process, although I like your gold star method a lot better, but I have like an app that has all of my weekly habits that I record to make sure the same thing. So like I have like meditation, 4 days a week. I have yoga that I have to do at least 2 days a week, guitar, learning Spanish, like all these different things. You and I have talked about this topic before, but I would love for you to kind of tell people how you balance all this, because when you add all these non-negotiables, you are essentially taking away other things, right? So if someone's like, "Oh, I'm too busy, I have too much going on to do such and such," it's essentially BS because they're just prioritizing their gold stars or going somewhere else. Like maybe they get a gold star in Netflix, right?
And this is where radical clarity comes in. So for me, I have a very unique life from most people. So I'm an early riser naturally. I get that from my dad. So this morning I was at my studio. I rent a private studio. So that's me in a room with the door locked, and it's my space. And that's a huge decision, and so it's an expense. But part of it is that I'm an early riser. I have almost no commute. And then I time block my day. So I'm being really clear about what do I have to get done today. And I tend to work in shifts. So I'll work from whatever time I get here, from 6 until like 10 or so. And that time is all time blocked. So I put the most important things in that early part of the day, and I don't schedule anything that time of morning, like meetings. So this is client work, it's mastermind work, it's outreach work, it's whatever business growth work. And there are plenty of days I won't check email until much later in the day. So I'm getting the stuff I have to get done first. And if I'm writing that day, then it's writing. Then I take a big break in the middle of the day. I'll take a 2-hour break every day. And in that break, I take a nap. I take a nap 7 days a week because I believe in the power of rest, of resetting. And in that time, do I sometimes do things related to work? Yeah, but I also take a walk, I'll read, I'll have that reset. And then all of my meetings with clients or phone calls or a podcast interview, they're all in the afternoon when I don't have as much initiative to create something from scratch, but where I'm really, really good at reacting. And then I'm home every day by 4 or 5 o'clock. And as I said, I don't really do anything at night. So it's just quality family time. And what's nice about that break midday is I can stop home. I can have lunch with my wife, or I can see, the baby, something like that.
Well, I think that you're far more structured than us, which I'm incredibly jealous of. I will tell you that. But I do, this process, I think is incredibly inspiring because it shows what exactly happens when you're actually structuring your day. And I find writers in general are really good at that, at really scheduling out these time blocks. But what I want to ask is, which is sort of uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of writers and artists, but what do you do when you meet people in these mastermind groups that you realize are the type of personalities that just never have a finished product? Like they're just stuck in the process. They just want to either keep writing and they're never actually going to put it out there. Like what is the
I love that.
You know what I'm talking about? It's like that's a personality with creatives.
So I have it's an exercise we go through called minimum viable success. So it borrows from Eric Ries's term minimum viable product, which is how you develop products. But the idea of minimum viable success is if you get really clear about why you create and you get really clear about what you hope it achieves. So let's say someone is writing a memoir and they're just, in the trenches, as you say, they can't finish. You start saying, well, why are you writing this? And they say, well, I want to tell my story. You say, okay, why else? So right now we're actually going through a process of writing your manifesto. So all these belief statements. And it's this idea of you're really parsing out, why are you doing this? And you realize, some of it might be to pass my story on to generations. It could be validation, but some of it is, I hope that I can help give young women or underdogs a sense of hope when they're going through X, Y, or Z. And you start realizing, okay, cool. Now that we know that, we know your book is going to be the primary way you do that. What is the minimum way you could do that? Which is often a conversation or a social media post or a blog post or you reaching out to one person who needs help or could do this. Could you have a little way that you experience that end goal? And it's really is about this idea of really visualizing why you're doing what you do and what you hope to get out of it. Because I think a lot of people don't think that through enough. You say, what do you want to do? And they're like, I want to publish a book. And you're like, okay, like why? You're like, I'll be a published author. And you're like, it's like, can we just spend more than 4 seconds thinking about what that means? And you realize often they have no idea what that means. They've not thought through that they want to redefine their identity. They want validation for something that's never been validated before. They have a deep need to help people in a way that no one views them as being able to do that. When you take that apart, you start realizing, oh, I have all these tools right in front of me to experience half of 1% of what that book might do. And if I do that in tiny ways, I actually start realizing that that's the goal of the book. And I think it helps you define what success looks like better. And I think it helps you realize like, oh, this book has boundaries because now I know why I'm writing it. Because I think we get trapped in this idea of we want the outcome to be bigger than what is rational or likely. So someone doesn't just want an album of music. They want to be a biggest rock star in the world. And does that happen? Yeah, like once in a blue moon that happens. But if that's what you're riding your entire identity on, you're in for a really rough ride.
God, that's so true. People have these expectations that are just wild. Do you feel like it's necessary to have some of those like magical fake expectations though to motivate you? I feel like with myself, sometimes I'll make up these crazy outlandish goals. Sometimes they actually come true, but sometimes it's just like a great motivating force to have this like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that you sort of know probably isn't going to happen, but kind of like that what if keeps you going.
I do think that can be incredibly useful. And I think it's useful if it causes you to ask difficult questions. It causes you to dig deeper than other people would. If it causes you to put yourself in uncomfortable situations to figure it out. So I can totally see the value of, Jim Carrey's famous writing himself a $20 million check when he was penniless. If it then causes you to go way further into this than other people would. If you're just saying, "Oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time. I'm going to watch Netflix tonight. All my friends are talking about it. I'm going to get to that on the weekend. I think I got a free hour on the weekend." Then it's tough. But if creating that big, shiny goal that is obnoxiously large motivates you to dig deeper, then I love that. I think that can be an amazing motivator.
So do you talk about that in any of your trainings, or is there anything that you have sort of manifested into your life? Like, are there things that you wrote down, like put into, a glass box and said, this is the end? Like
things that are like beyond coincidence. Like you're like, no doubt I just made this crap up like out of nowhere and here it is.
Well, the first thing we do in the mastermind is an exercise I have called clarity cards. It's basically you take out a stack of index cards, and every card you write down an important responsibility or something that you want to experience or achieve. So you write them all out, and then you've got to build a pyramid like on the floor where there's one card at the top, then 2 below that, 3 below that, and 4 below that. And it's meant to be this centering thing about what is most important to you. And you can only have those 10 cards. And the idea is that anything that's not in those 10 cards is secondary, and that you have to go through that horrible process of putting one card at the top. So for me, when I first did this, and I don't know where that idea came from when I first did it like 10 or 12 years ago, I put family at the top. And that forced me to think about, at the time I had a commute to New York City, and it's a long commute to get there, and you're away from home. It made me think about, well, if I'm saying my own interpretation of that card was to have lots and lots of quality time with family, how can I do that if I'm on the train and in an office somewhere all the time? And that to me was the impetus for going out on my own, was that idea of challenging myself to think, if I'm going to put that card first, how am I living up to it? What would that mean? Oh, I mean, have my own business? Well, that's totally insane. How would I do that? Well, maybe if this, then you find out the company is shutting down, and you start doing that thing where when the company said it was shutting down, I started preparing in the back end to start a company. But after I started my little company, I would still tell friends, well, yeah, I'm doing my company. It's called WeGrowMedia. And I think I'm working mostly with writers. I'm also doing this website thing. I would still have friends say to me, you know what, Dan, don't worry, you're going to find something. They literally thought I was covering for the fact I hadn't found a job yet.
Oh my God.
So that's probably my best example
Yes.
of the idea of where clarity leads to, I guess, a reality.
No, well, I think that's so beautifully said because we talk about manifesting so much. And I think some people, okay, so this is like probably a 10-year ago episode of Family Guy, but there was like this Family Guy episode where Peter's in the corner and he's like, just like on his hands and knees with his eyes closed. And they're like, what's he doing? And they're like, oh, he just listened to The Secret. And they're like talking about how that's like, he's just going to make everything happen by sitting in a corner and hoping for it. And I love that because I think so many people think it's just that we believe in magic. And yeah, there's a little bit of that. But what you're explaining is no, it's actually our minds foreseeing what we can make happen and getting us there by seeing the end of the road first. And I think there is different ways to do that, but you're explaining that more strategic side, and other people just, they want to pray, and that's okay too. It's like such an interesting personality difference is all.
That's like what being a creative is, though. You just make shit up out of thin air. Like you
Yes.
make up a book. You're like, I think of a painting, and like, poof, there it is. Like it's not much different.
I think a good point with that too is there's not one way.
Yes.
It's a great thing about working with so many people is that you realize they have their own process, their own preferences, and you can have that and you can create your own path, and then you just have to do the hard work to figure out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so with that said, as we're kind of coming to the end, what is your next big manifesting? What is the next big goal for your company?
So it's funny. So I've had this company for 8 years. And one thing I've thought a lot about is how I do consulting with writers primarily, and I've done the Mastermind. I used to do a lot of online courses. And one thing that I've been really looking in the mirror with is, am I still essentially like a freelancer, someone who just takes clients and does that? And is that really a company? And how can this grow beyond that? And the other thing is really looking at the Mastermind, realizing something is happening here that is truly special. So I literally have a sign on, I have a light. I have this big light in my room, and on the light, I put a sign about 6 months ago that reads, I'm looking at it, what if the Mastermind was 100% of my business? It's just a question. What would that look like if this thing that's working really well was 100% of my business? I'm not saying that is what's going to happen. I'm not saying I'm moving there in any near term. It's just that idea of like, well, if it was that, wouldn't I do this? Wouldn't I do that? So just because of that little sign on the light, I have made a lot of decisions where now in the Mastermind, I have one-on-one calls, which I never had before. And those have been amazing. I thought about if the Mastermind starts on January 1st and you sign up on December 12th, it used to be you sign up and I say, thank you so much. I'll get back to you right before we start. And I was like, hey, if this was 100% of what you did, is that the best way to onboard people? And I've created this whole process to get them ready and give them resources and get them comfortable. So on day one, they feel cozy and like they know what to expect. So that little sign has been an indicator of how can I double down on something that's working, and how can that lead to something where there's all kinds of growth, not just business growth, but growth in how many people I can work with, how many people can connect with each other, and how can I experience craft? How can I make this thing that I do, how can I elevate the craft of that? Even though it's working, even though if I change nothing, it would be good, how can I make it truly exceptional? So that's something I've been totally obsessing about.
I love that so much. I find so much parallel in that because I feel like the minute that I hyper-focused on, I'm going to make this doula thing like my whole world, you start to, and sometimes uncomfortably so, but you start to feel things shed and like fall away, and it can feel really scary. And then you're like, well, if I want this thing to be where all my time is going, I have to be ready to free myself of the things that maybe aren't the best use of my time anymore. And it's cool to see as that hyper-focus happens, that business just grows exponentially. All it takes is that shift of intention, and suddenly it's like, whoa, this is taking off. It's pretty cool.
Totally.
So we are wrapping up. You want to?
Well, before we get to our last question, which Chelsea loves to ask, this is related. Are you willing to kind of out your culinary experiment that you've been going through for the past month or two? I know it's quasi-secretive.
Yeah, so this is funny, and this
Drum
is something
roll.
that Jay's been helpful with. Where I listened to an interview with a woman who wrote a book about being vegetarian, and it was really within a minute of the podcast where the way it was introed was just sort of like, well, basically the bottom line is I've started becoming more of a vegetarian in the last 6 months. I put really light boundaries on it, but it was just this idea, and I think it goes back to that idea of craft, of just thinking critically about what you put in your body. That's probably the start and the end of it for me. It's nothing, this can go a lot of places, but it was that idea of, if you're putting something that my own interpretation of it is like it's not ideal, could I be mindful enough to elevate that craft and put stuff in my body that my interpretation is better? And I will just put a big caveat on that, which is do whatever you want in your life. I'm not judging you. Figure out what works for you.
Of course.
My final question on that is, which actually is just a very good segue from
right?
food
I thought so.
into like that, is, okay, so if I had to drop you right now into your childhood kitchen, the place where you grew up, what's the first thought or, thing that comes to mind?
Avocado green.
Oh.
Speaking of vegetarian.
Yeah, what's avocado green, though?
That was the color of my kitchen because it was built in 1970. The refrigerator was avocado green. The oven was avocado green. The carpet was avocado green. That was the color.
That's
that
probably
and
the same as
gold,
the
I
house
think, was
you
the
grew
color
up
of
in.
all kitchens in the 70s.
That or like peach or orange, I feel like were big too. What were you, any particular meal that pops in your head?
Probably the most were the meals I didn't want to eat because you had to sit there for an hour and meditate on why you were definitely not going to eat it, and your mother was definitely not going to let you out of the table until you ate it.
Fair
Which
enough.
can you relate to so well now that you're a parent? It's just like full circle, man.
Totally.
Oh, man. Dan Blank, dude, thank you so much. I got a lot out of this call, even after having so many conversations with you that have not been recorded. It's just been a great, enlightening conversation on these topics that we love so much. And I'm beyond grateful that we've maintained this friendship for amount of years. It's pretty special that we both sort of landed in similar spaces, and we started out in similar spaces and deviated and came back around to where we are now.
I love that. Thank you both so much. It means the world to me. I love what you're building here.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Lots of love to your family. I hope we can all get the kids together sometime soon.
Thank you.
See you, bro. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We appreciate you. If you like what we're doing, could we ask you to go to iTunes and leave us a nice review and rating? It really helps us and helps other people to know that we're providing a good podcast for you. If you'd like to find us on social media, you can find us at Shifting Perceptions Podcast. You can find my artwork at jalders.com or me on social media at jalders. You can find my beautiful wife Chelsea on ommamasdoulas.com or on social media at ommamasdoulas. And if you'd like to join our newsletter or find episodes online with show notes, you can go to shiftingperceptionspodcast.com. Until next week, talk to you then. See you guys. Thanks so much.